Well, I also think it's an open question still to what degree Hitler's policies were right-wing versus left-wing, and no one's done the analysis properly yet to determine that.
Well, what do we
Because
consider?
he was a national socialist movement for a reason, and the socialist part of it wasn't accidental.
This is Jordan Peterson arguing with a straight face that Adolf Hitler was a socialist, like, say, Bernie Sanders. As we all know, the Third Reich was predicated on interventions to curtail capitalism's excesses and promote fairness and social justice. And of course, the theoretical underpinnings of the labor movement can be found within the covers of Mein Kampf. The person who Peterson is belittling is a leftist political commentator who goes by the name of Destiny, but whose real name is Stephen Bonnell. In a bid to throw some red meat to his Neanderthal fans, Peterson went off on Bonnell, attempting to lump him in with the woke mob, who, Peterson says, are just communists and Nazis in disguise. For decades, Peterson has been claiming that he's warning against Nazism, and in a sense, this is true, because to him, the Nazis are liberals. We'll pick up the conversation after the point where Peterson claims that global elites are promoting environmentalism so they can exterminate the planet's poor. You shouldn't be surprised. In the same interview, he argued against vaccines for children, claimed that modern medicine has not been beneficial in any way, and said that COVID vaccines were not really vaccines, but experimental concoctions foisted on the masses. During the pandemic, Peterson endorsed ivermectin. Anyway, when Peterson and others on the far right allude to a global cabal of genocidal schemers, they are promoting an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that's rooted in Nazism. Hitler was always warning about the internationalist Jewish wire pullers who were lurking around every corner and keeping Aryans down.
Isn't it more likely that people are either misinformed or misguided than people are legitimately trying to depopulate the planet?
Look, misinformed and ignorant, that's plenty relevant and worth considering. And stupidity is always a better explanation than malevolence. But malevolence is also an explanation. And no, I don't think it's a better explanation because...
Why would we waste so much money sending food aid, having Bush do, programs through Africa for AIDS, having other billionaires like Bill Gates invest so much money in anti-malarial stuff? Like, why would all the global elites be so invested in helping and killing the people here at the same time?
Well, some of it's confusion.
Bonnell is certainly knowledgeable, but he doesn't seem to hear Peterson's dog whistles.
Okay.
And some of it's the fact, many things can be happening simultaneously with a fair bit of internal paradox because people just don't know which way is up often. But the problem with the argument, okay, so you tell me what you think about this.
Mm-hmm.
So, Hitler's cover story was that he wanted to make the glorious Third Reich and elevate the Germans to the highest possible status for the longest possible period of time. Okay, but that wasn't the outcome. The outcome was that Hitler shot himself through the head after he married his wife, who died from poison the same day, in a bunker underneath Berlin while Europe was in flames. Well, he was insisting that the Germans deserved exactly what they got because they weren't the noble people he thought they were. And then you might say, well, Hitler's plans collapsed in flames, and wasn't that a catastrophe? Or you could say that was exactly what he was aiming for from the beginning because he was brutally resentful and miserable right from the time he was, a rejected artist at the age of 16.
Hitler's 1,000-year Reich was just a grand-scale joke foisted on everyone. He said he wanted to elevate the Germans to the highest possible status, but really he wanted to see them suffer and die due to all his personal resentment and rejection. And Peterson says he wants to help elevate his adherents to the top of the dominance hierarchy, but really he encourages them to consult with their resentment, explaining that doing so can serve as an instructional. He also reminds them of rejection, specifically female rejection, and he talks about others whose resentment and rejection caused them to become mass murderers, like the Columbine killers, whose schizophrenic writings he recommends. To be more precise, he touts the diary of Eric Harris, which is brimful with lunacy and pro-Nazi remarks. Peterson has suggested that the Columbine killers were satanically possessed. Now, listen as he says something similar about the dictator who inspired them.
And so he was working, or something was working within him, and something that might well be regarded as demonic, whose end goal was precisely what it attained, which was the devastation of hundreds of millions of people, and Europe left in a smoking ruin. And the cover story was the Grand Third Reich. And so there's no reason at all to assume that we're not in exactly the same situation right now.
We are in a similar situation right now, at least regarding Peterson's cult. His cover story is that he's warning against Nazism and trying to rescue who he calls rough working-class men from the clutches of the far right. Like with Hitler, Peterson represents himself as a savior who improves his followers' lives, but really, something is working within him that can be regarded as demonic. As I illustrate in The Devil and His Due, Peterson is a schizophrenic and suffers from the delusion that he's possessed by Lucifer. He has written and spoken about a voice with eyes in his mind that regulates his speech, and I believe that he thinks this voice is that of the devil. He is as mad as a hatter. I mean, just look at the jacket he's wearing with the skulls and death's head, and of course, the death's head was a Nazi symbol. Also, wearing unusual clothing is common among people with schizophrenia.
I think that Hitler's motives and everything that he was trying to do wasn't a secret. I don't think that anybody had to guess that he was incredibly anti-Semitic, that his Aryan supremacy was going to lead to the destruction and the murder of like so many different people in concentration camps. Like none of this was a secret. It's not like he was hiding it.
He hid a lot of it.
I mean, like he tried to maybe hide the death camps, but nobody in Germany was wondering like, wow, crazy that pogroms are happening against Jewish people. That's so crazy. Or wow, they're all being shipped to just mainly the Jews to camps to work. Like that's kind of interesting. Or wow, he talks about this a lot in Mein Kampf, but maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't think you can compare like Hitler to people that are worried about climate change. The worry that I have here is because we're applying this.
People in Germany thought Hitler was perfectly motivated by the highest of benevolent.
If I were to take this standard of evidence and apply this lens of analysis, couldn't I say the exact same thing about the conservative constellation of belief? They don't want to intervene anywhere in the world because they don't care about the problems there. They're anti-immigration because they hate brown people. Trump wanted to ban Muslims from coming to the United States because he's xenophobic. Conservatives don't want to have taxes to help the poor because they want homeless people to starve and die in the winter. I feel like
some of that's true. And yes, you can adopt that criticism. I think the difference with regards especially to the libertarian side of the conservative enterprise, but also to some degree to the conservative enterprise, is they're not building a central gigantic organization to put forward this particular utopian claim. And so even if the conservatives are as morally addled as the leftists, and to some degree that might be true, they're not organized with the same gigantism in mind.
This is another one of Peterson's conspiracy theories, that liberals are working to create a superstate that will imitate the Soviet Union and bury its enemies in the ground. As proof, he points to COVID mandates. As a psychologist who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, Peterson understands the type of messaging that would appeal to people with paranoid ideation, that is, false beliefs concerning being controlled, plotted against, or spied on. And he doubtless knows that such people can go on shooting sprees to stop their imagined harassers. Put plainly, he's a crazy person trying to communicate with other crazy people, and everyone else is just along for the ride, including Destiny, who's merely a foil Peterson can exploit to assert his dominance while trying to link him to the global elite and their future genocide. This is gaslighting and a signal to the cohort of Peterson's base who understand that he's not really a self-help guru. But let's return to Peterson saying that people on the right are not dangerous.
And so they're not as dangerous at the moment. Now, they could well be, and they have been in the past, but at the moment they're not.
This from someone who, after January 6th, said that Donald Trump was right and had been treated with contempt by the left. This from a man who supported Canada's so-called Freedom Convoy and their bid to overthrow the Canadian government. This from someone who says he's trying to prevent the sort of authoritarianism that prevailed in the 20th century along with its atrocities, and who has said nothing about Russian atrocities in Ukraine. This from a person who claims to be warning about another Holocaust, but who has failed to praise the government of Ontario, where he lives, for bolstering Holocaust education in the provincial curriculum. This from a man who has remained silent about the alarming rise of the Alternative for Deutschland party, its ties to neo-Nazism, and the recent massive demonstrations in Germany against this organization and neo-Nazism.
I don't believe that the conservatives are necessarily any less tempted by the calling of power than the leftists. That's going to vary from situation to situation. Though I would say probably overall in the 20th century, the leftists have the worst record in terms of sheer numbers of people killed.
He's equating contemporary and moderate leftists with Stalinists and Maoists. The message has to be simple and irrational because his followers are simple and irrational.
So, I mean, it depends on how we're quantifying
not
that.
Really. Okay, we'll just quantify sure. Mao. How's that? Direct death of 100 million people. So, that's a pretty stark fact. And if we're going to argue about that, well, then we're really not going to get anywhere.
I've read 2 books about Mao, and although he was a monster, the number of deaths he's responsible for is difficult to pin down. According to one estimate, it ranges between 40 and 80 million. Peterson pulls numbers out of the air. He has said that in the Great Leap Forward alone, Mao killed 40 million, 100 million, and it didn't matter how many million. He has also said that Stalin murdered 20, 30, 35, and 60 million, and he has claimed that the Nazis exterminated 6 and 7 million Jews. Yet he has also said, and I quote, "I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards." When Peterson mentioned Mao to Bonnell, it may have seemed as though he were being sympathetic to Mao's victims, but when he fabricates statistics, this suggests that he's just using those victims to further his cheap neo-Nazi scheme.
So,
I'm not disagreeing that the Holodomor happened as well. The Soviet Union and
yes,
China were horrible.
20 to
I mean, I'm not
50
going to.
million
Yeah, I'm not
people
going
in the
to.
Soviet. Yeah,
say
okay.
those were horrible
Well,
things. Yeah, of course.
and
Yeah.
it's a war of.
I'm just saying, for World War II, it depends on how much you attribute the war does to Nazi Germany, et cetera, et cetera. But sure, like largely speaking, I don't think that the left beat the right because the right wasn't trying. I don't think it's because Hitler's lack of trying led him to kill less people than who ended up dying during the Great Leap Forward or during the industrialization of the Soviet
Yes,
Union.
well, I also think it's an open question still to what degree Hitler's policies were right-wing versus left-wing, and no one's done the analysis properly yet to determine that.
Well, what do we
Because
consider?
it was a national socialist movement for a reason, and the socialist part of it wasn't accidental.
Well, but I mean, there was no, cooperatively formed businesses that were owned by all of the people for the people and distributed to the people. And I don't think redistribution was high on Hitler's list of
That's
things
true.
to do for.
That's true. It was
But
a
I do
strange
think that-
mix of
well, but
totalitarian policy.
I don't think it was a strange mix. I think it was a bid to appeal to mid-left and center-left, the KPD and the German Socialist Party by calling themselves National Socialists. I think it was very much like an authoritarian, ultra-nationalist regime that pretty squarely fits with. People get mad if you call something far right or far left because they have an attachment
Well,
to terms,
one of
but-
the things I would have done if I would have been able to hang on to my professorship at the University of Toronto would have been to extract out a random sample of Nazi policies and strip them of markers of their origin and present them to a set of people with conservative or leftist beliefs and see who agreed with them more. And that analysis has never been done as far as I know. So we actually don't know. And we could know if the social scientists would do their bloody job, which they don't, generally speaking. That's something we could know. We could probably use the AI systems we have now, the large language models, to determine to what degree left and right beliefs intermingled in the rise of National Socialism. So that's all technically possible. So, and it hasn't been done, so it's a matter of opinion.
Sure.
So,
I don't necessarily disagree.
He doesn't necessarily disagree? Really? And come on, social scientists, do your damn job. Find out whether the Nazis were liberals based on data you would collect from people today. AI could analyze that data and write an article's findings section. The finished product could then be sent for peer review to a distant galaxy by using our brainwaves and uttering incantations while fingering magical beads. I mean, it's not like anyone else has researched the subject and found, say, that Germany's conservative elites supported the Nazis because they were petrified of the communists, or that workers who complained about unfair conditions in the Third Reich were brutally repressed, or that members of the German left were systematically intimidated, imprisoned, and murdered. And it's certainly not as if Peterson has admitted that Hitler was conservative. The picture you will hear him talk about in the next clip is this one, a propaganda portrait depicting Peterson's hero as Germany's hero.
Then this is an infamous picture, this one in the middle. So what do you think about that? Oh yeah, he's a knight. He's a white knight, in fact. Yeah, so he's assimilated to the idea of medieval nobility, and in its purest form. He's a knight of the people, and so there's a Wagnerian element to that, and he was a great admirer of Wagnerian music, by the way, and Hitler wanted to put classical music halls in every city in Europe. It was an obsession of his. He was obsessed with Wagnerian opera, and he claimed that he had quasi-religious experiences listening to it. So he's a very strange character because Hitler appears to have been extremely high in openness, which is not something you would expect for someone who is a tyrant, because conservative people are basically very low in openness and very high in orderliness. But he appeared to be someone who was very high in orderliness and very high in openness, and I think that's one of the things that made him charismatic. So there's a deeply conservative element. and an element that was obsessed with will and antithetical to chaos, but he was able to bring this tremendous artistic force into his politicking, and it was captivating to people.
It's certainly captivating to Peterson. It has been ever since he was 13 and wrote an essay about Auschwitz, wherein he admitted he could have worked as one of the guards. You will have noted that when talking to Destiny, Peterson angrily portrayed Hitler as demonic, but when addressing his students, he sympathetically depicted him as artistic, high in openness, charismatic, and deeply fond of music. With Destiny, it was all about making his side look like Nazis. But with the students, it was mostly about sending signals to people watching the video. By and large, the students were props. Finally, we need to ask why Peterson says most of his work revolves around the subject of Nazism, but so much of what he says about Nazism is balderdash. The short answer is, the lies serve as dog whistles. For example, when Peterson argues that the National Socialists were democratic socialists, or socialists in the sense that Scandinavian countries are socialist, this is a neo-Nazi signal. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to receive 45 written examples of Peterson making disturbing remarks about Nazism, you can email me at teparfit@gmail.com. And if you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe.